Hello and welcome to another story from the old Fliers. I recently posted a video about ridiculous historical prophecies, wrong decisions made in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The focus was on US Admiral Ernest J. King, who in the early stages of World War II determined that unescorted merchant ships were just as safe sailing alone compared to being in a convoy. The British had offered escort ships, which he declined, many say due to his Anglophobia. A subscriber, Bill, wrote that the east coast of America 80 years later is still suffering the effects of pollution from these sunken tankers. Another subscriber, Ben, wrote that King's staff said the man just didn't like the English. He disliked everyone. Ben went on to relate the story of an interesting meeting where Lord Louis Mountbatten was showing Admiral King plans for an aircraft carrier built out of ice. Yes, you heard that right. Showing how strong the icecrete was, Mountbatten shot at a chunk of it. The bullet ricocheted off and went through King's trousers, missing his leg. That was good enough for me to research the story. This icecrete is known as Pyke, a frozen ice composite made from 14% wood pulp and 86% ice. During World War II, Geoffrey Pyke proposed it as a suitable material for a supersized aircraft carrier for the British Royal Navy. Pyke features unusual properties, including a relatively slow melting rate due to its low thermal conductivity, as well as a vastly improved strength and toughness compared to ordinary ice. These physical properties can make the material comparable to concrete as long as the material is kept frozen. Pyke is slightly more difficult to form than concrete as it expands during the freezing process. However, it can be repaired and maintained using seawater as a raw material. The mixture can be molded into any shape and frozen, and it will be tough and durable as long as it is kept at or below freezing temperature. Geoffrey Pyke managed to convince Lord Mountbatten of the potential of his proposal around 1942. The idea for a ship made of just ice impressed the United States and Canada enough that a 60-foot or 18 metres long 1,000-ton ship was built in 1 month on Patricia Lake in the Canadian Rockies. Plain ice proved to be too weak. Scientist Hermann Mark, who fled Germany when the Nazis came to power, had written that ice could be toughened with fibres just as cement is strengthened with steel wires. In Britain, combined operations requisitioned a large meat store 5 floors underground beneath Smithfield Market, which lies within sight of St Paul's Cathedral, to conduct experiments. The experiments in the Smithfield Meat Market in the City of London took place in great secrecy behind a screen of animal carcasses. In honour of the originator of the project, the reinforced ice was named Pyke. The purpose of this work was never explained to the technicians, except that it was for Project Habakkuk. Project Habakkuk was the plan to build an enormous aircraft carrier, actually more of a floating island than a ship in the traditional sense.
The Habakkuk project arose out of a problem that the British, and the other allies to be fair, faced in the early part of the Second World War. U-boats were of course causing problems by sinking merchant ships, even those in convoys, and even with America's entry into World War II, there was the so-called mid-Atlantic gap. Here, U-boats could operate with great effectiveness as they were out of range of land-based aircraft from either side of the Atlantic. Air cover in the mid-Atlantic would drastically curtail the effectiveness of these submarines, but there were a few problems with implementing this. Fleet carriers were in short supply, and would in any case be a prime target. They also could not recover and launch larger twin- or four-engine patrol craft, which would be the most efficient way to cover large areas of ocean. And even a fleet carrier's hull carried relatively few operational supplies compared to the fuel needs of running dozens of patrol flights every day for weeks or months on end.
Lord Mountbatten, years later, in a speech said, "In 1942, I was sent to see Prime Minister Churchill at Chequers. I was told he was in his bath. I said, 'Good, that's exactly where I want him to be.' I nipped up the stairs and called out to him, 'I have a block of a new material which I would like to put in your bath.' Mountbatten dropped the ice between the bare legs of Churchill. After that, Churchill suggested that I should take it to the Quebec Conference to be held in 1943. At that conference there were clashes of tempers. During one meeting, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest King, an Anglophobe with a fiery temper, got so mad he almost leaned across the conference table to smash his fist into a British face after a particularly offensive exchange. The impasse between the two sides reached a crisis point. The meeting grew so heated that midway through, Field Marshal Alan Brooke suggested to General George Marshall that they clear the room of the 60-plus officer assistants so that they could have a off-the-record meeting. George Marshall agreed. It was near the end of this highly charged, closed-door meeting that Mountbatten went to Alan Brooke and asked for the opportunity to update everyone on Habakkuk and give a demonstration. Alan Brooke then turned to Marshall, who gave his permission. Mountbatten had brought a block of pykrete and a block of ice along to demonstrate the potential to the entourage of admirals and generals who had come along with Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Mountbatten then drew his pistol and shot at the ice block. It shattered. Next, he shot at the pykrete to give an idea of the resistance of that kind of ice to projectiles. The bullet ricocheted off the block, grazing the trouser leg of Admiral Ernest King and ending up in the wall. The aides, meanwhile, were all assembled outside the thick wooden doors of the conference room and well within earshot. When they heard the gunfire, one officer shouted, "First they argue, then they begin hitting each other. Now they've started shooting." On bursting through the door, however, they found a room full of ice chips and laughing generals and admirals. I guess that is an example of breaking the ice. Project Habakkuk was never put into action because of limitations in funds and the belief that the tides of war were beginning to turn in favour of the Allies, using more conventional methods. The so-called Atlantic Gap was a dangerous place for convoys. Land-based aircraft, a threat to U-boats, couldn't cover this mid-Atlantic gap. A floating airbase would be ideal, yet steel and aluminium to build a base were in short supply. In his memoirs, British General Ismay wrote, "A good deal of consideration, much of it highly technical, was also given to the feasibility of building floating platforms, which could either be used by fighters to support opposed landings until such airfields could be secured, or act as staging points for ferrying aircraft over long distances." The idea, as originally conceived by a member of Combined Operations Staff and vehemently supported by Mountbatten, was that these floating platforms should be constructed out of icebergs. They would be provided with engines which would enable them to steam at slow speed and with refrigeration plants to prevent them from melting. They would be unsinkable. The whole thing seemed completely fantastic, but the idea was not abandoned without a great deal of investigation. Various alternative methods of construction were then considered by the United States naval authorities, but in the end there was general agreement that carriers and auxiliary carriers would serve the same purpose more effectively. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to encourage new content, and comments always welcome.